here, Kyle's here, Meta's here. So we can definitely go ahead and get started.
I'm here too.
I was gonna say Kent's here too. Kent, are you coming to the meetup on Wednesday, downtown at Pioneer Square?
Oh no, I'm currently in Japan.
Oh, word. All right. What brought you there? Just curious.
Oh well, my family's here.
I figured. Okay. I didn't want to like. Are you Japanese?
Yeah.
Word. Okay.
All right, well, go ahead and get started, guys. I'm just switching devices.
One of the things we wanted to talk about was stake weighting versus the distribution of rewards versus having it completely open. So that's been something that's been churning on our end. So I'm keen and eager to get Vlad's opinion on this and have a discussion on that topic.
So,
just as an FYI.
Meta, that's not quite an accurate summation.
Okay, go ahead,
So
Kyle.
the argument is for fixed versus variable stakes.
Okay, meaning deposit amounts or protocol?
Deposit amounts, that's correct.
Okay. Yeah,
So,
I mean, I'm prepared to have this debate with you.
Like, if the deposit amounts are the same, then you have stake-weighted rewards already. So it's not about like variable stakes and fixed rewards, because no one is proposing that.
That's good. Yeah, that's good. I agree. I mean, I agree that this is like really what the conversation is about. Hey, Greg, have you switched devices?
Hey, yeah, I just switched devices. So what was the agreement on there? I heard that you guys agreed on something.
We agreed on the characterization of the problem. People keep saying that it's about stake rated versus some other kind of rewards, and that's not what it's about at all. The discussion is about variable versus fixed stakes.
Okay. So do we have like only deposits of a fixed denomination, or do we have a variable deposit amount? And you know, there's a. It's still an interesting conversation, definitely. So, I mean, I'm happy to kick it off if you don't want to kick it off, Kyle. I mean, I'm happy for you to kick it off though too. Also.
So, I do want to point out that I'm just trying to make sure that Nash gets a hearing, because this is mainly his driver or his.
If you're not here, are you waiting for him? Is that what you're saying?
I don't know if he's coming. His back is hurting him, so he might be resting.
Okay. Well, so I didn't understand what you were saying there. Are you saying we should wait for him?
No.
Okay.
Why don't you go ahead, Vlad?
Sure. So, I mean, I think like the number one kind of like immediate starting point is that if a validator who has, say, like 4 times the minimum deposit runs 4 nodes, that's like more overhead than if they were running 1 node with 4 times that deposit. And so more protocol overhead for arguably additionally very low marginal benefit, because you can't really force them to have different connections or different nodes, and therefore we'll be just providing kind of a redundant messages and providing no value for that overhead.
Presumably redundant communication and additional bandwidth to communicate with the other validators.
Yeah, that's the overhead I'm talking about, basically the additional messages.
Okay, so I think this is the crux of it. We do not view that as overhead. We view that as a benefit because they are adding network capacity in order
No,
to.
they're reducing network capacity by adding network overhead.
They have to have sufficient bandwidth to handle the communications.
Which they do once.
But if they are providing the network capacity, they are. It's also part of their OpEx. They are paying to have enough connectivity to communicate as 4 nodes.
Yeah, but it's basically only requires more upload and no additional download. And the more upload really is just messages that are almost all the same. And I don't know if upload actually is a dominates their cost at all. The cost of uploading messages, probably not at all. Probably cost of download is, I mean, at least in terms of the bandwidth overhead, much higher. But I'm not sure actually that this is really the crux of it. I think the crux of it is more around the difference between sampling from a weighted distribution and sampling from a uniform distribution. When you're sampling from a weighted distribution, you're much more likely to be sampled of nodes who have high weight. And actually, if we are really sampling from a weighted distribution, because there's going to be concentration of weight, but we're kind of obscuring that fact by if you want to have fixed deposit sizes. And then so we're kind of pretending to be sampling from a uniform distribution when really we're sampling from a parallel weighted distribution, and actually we're not getting some of the information that we could be getting out of the protocol.
Okay, so
namely that like some proportion of the weight.
But this is one of the other
is on has.
Wait. So can I stop you there for just a second?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
So one of the problems with your assumption is that you've assumed that in the presence of variable stakes, people will not split their stakes across 4 nodes and do and obscure the information.
I haven't quite assumed that. It's but like I do have it as desiderata that I'm not creating a game where there's an optimal deposit size. They may or may not do that depending on, and actually like I do. So if we have, so to some extent, like it will, as you say, increase their cost to produce additional signatures from multiple nodes. It might reduce their risk, but that really isn't something that we can tell just from the protocol spec, and it's going to depend on like exactly the way their setup is configured. Because you can have like plenty of redundancy in a single validator. So like it's unclear to me whether they'll split it up just for risk purposes, and I don't want to create an ideal size because like I think that there are like savings both in terms of getting more information per message and in terms of the number of messages that we have if we allow them to put all their weight. And what about staking pools also? And this all kind of is in the context of the question of like how many slots do we have? So imagine if there's like 100 validator slots for a particular namespace. And there's like 1,000 who want to get in. Which get in? Like, do you have equal validator sizes, but you kind of have an auction so that they all place the same size? Do you sample them and each have like a global minimum deposit size? There's kind of like this related question about access and who gets to actually have a slot.
So you could arrange it as a an auction where you take bids on what they're willing to put up, and then you make So in the equal stake case, you could make everyone put up the minimum bid, right? The minimum winning bid.
Yeah, yeah. So like that's like totally a plausible mechanism. Um, um, but you know, at that point, what you're doing is you're giving up on free security because you could have had everyone put in their actual bid, which they have committed to place in some eventuality. And so we could kind of for free in some way at that point, rather than using this like end price auction, just
Well,
have everyone pay their bid price, or maybe the second price after them, so that we have like this slightly maybe higher chance of having some nice game theory.
I will argue that it isn't guaranteed that if you make everyone put up their actual bid that you end up with a more secure network.
Oh, so there's like a kind of sense in which having more deposits makes the network more secure.
Well, except if the highest bid for one validator is 10 times the remaining bids, now you're as secure as that validator and no more secure.
Yeah. So in terms of fault tolerance, I agree with you, but in terms of economic robustness against like external incentives, like I don't think that's quite right. So there's like I guess the Byzantine fault tolerance analysis and the incentive analysis, you know, will like diverge in small validator counts, which is kind of interesting.
Or outweighted validator counts, right? Like
yeah, sure. Where you have what I mean is like, you know, where when a small validator count controls all the weight. Yeah. So you know, but you know what we kind of like this whole idea that you know like somehow like that same risk is going to exist, but you won't know it if you just make everyone place the same deposit size. And so like actually like it's not like you solve the problem by having the same deposit size.
yeah, so the slot argument is actually the most compelling argument that I have heard for allowing variable stakes.
Yeah, I mean, I personally like the overhead argument and the
but I don't think that Nash will find that compelling because like in his mind he wants to balance capex, opex, and stake as approximately equal.
Do you mean capex, opex, and return on stake?
No, he wants you to put up equal amounts of capex, you know, some number 1 or 2 years of opex, or like opex for a specified number of years, and then stake that's equal to those two amounts.
So he wants you to put a deposit that's on the order of your expenses, like exactly.
Yes.
Oh no way! I feel like the deposit should be orders of magnitude more than the expenses.
People won't do it then.
Oh, why not? It's all about the returns. The returns will justify, like the returns are going to be on the order of the deposit, not on the order of the expenses.
The thing is you.
What I mean by that is like the returns are going to be like, you know, they're going to think about them as an interest rate on their deposit. And like if they have like a risk adjusted rate of like 10% on their deposits, then like the amount of deposits that will show up will be so that like everyone makes like 10% on a risk adjusted basis.
I wish you were here. So one of the things is we want to incentivize people to build out network and compute resources
Yeah, totally.
in proportion to the amount of stake that they're putting up.
Yeah. So, but that's something that is, I would say, like A, not part of an MVP, and B, requires kind of cryptographic proofs and verification games that you know are kind of more or less well understood, but relatively high overhead.
What was that acronym you used?
Minimal viable product, MVP. Yeah. It's like a layer of cryptography that verifies that people are really running nodes, as opposed to like running like different nodes, like that basically gets them to like prove and commit to the work that they're doing in a way that like makes them provably distinct from another node. It like adds a lot of overhead, and is like a bunch of crypto engineering that is, I don't think. A major part of this discussion at the moment, because we're not really paying them actually to run nodes. We're paying them to form consensus. And then the full nodes are going to like provide this public service, which is like unfortunately the case in all the public blockchains today, and will probably be the case until we have blockchain scaling, that like full nodes will be the norm way that like we enforce the validity of the blocks. And somehow like if they form consensus on valid blocks, then like that's enough for us. We don't need them to actually run additional nodes as long as there's enough full nodes. And full nodes are incentivized today by like all of the businesses who run applications and block explorers and exchanges who like, for the sake of the security, have to run their own nodes. And so like, the story today is kind of like, we don't actually incentivize validators to run nodes. We have like nodes that are incentivized externally, and we use the validators to form consensus. And we like because of like the additional overhead required for everyone to verify the blocks, if you actually do require the validators have provably distinct executions of the protocol. So somehow what I'm saying is like, like the additional overhead doesn't seem worth it in our like kind of in this kind of like current like time frame and context of blockchain space. Because like people will run full nodes to make sure that blocks are valid, and then what that really ultimately means, because they're not relying on validators to be full nodes, and there's many full nodes that aren't validators people are really relying on, is that full nodes won't be incentivized anyways. And so like at the end of the day, like I don't think that we're really building an incentive mechanism for full nodes, but for just the formation of consensus, which is entirely a weight-based thing, either in terms of the number of nodes times fixed weight or the individual weight of the nodes in a variable weight system. Yeah, I mean, do you guys imagine that validators are going to be your full nodes?
Yes. So you cannot validate without being a full node.
Well, you better not. Otherwise, you can get like slashed for making an invalid block. But you don't like you technically like could do everything without servicing the normal full node interface. Just like there's only like a subset of the interface that you really need to service to be a validator.
You could conceivably ignore user traffic, but that's it.
Well, no, you can also ignore requests for blocks. You could ignore, which is like the most notable, is just a super notable thing. Because like that's where like that's like specifically how nodes use full nodes usually is like they download blocks from them.
So no, we don't imagine that they will be the only full nodes. There are cases, there are situations where the validators are likely to be the only full nodes. If you set up a shard that is high performance.
I think that like without like a single one node who's auditing them, it becomes a scary thing where they get to basically determine the rules of the protocol in a majority, and that's kind of like it means that like if you rely on that, we kind of lose this property that we are resistant to cartels, because like the cartel gets to like set the rule. So we kind of really are relying on like clients and full nodes to validate blocks in order to have the kind of cartel resistant property from this protocol. If there's no one keeping them honest by checking the validity of the blocks, they can basically change the rules behind the back door.
In a high performance shard, there will be few enough people that have enough performance to keep up that they may as well collect validation rewards while they're at it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that might make sense, but I think like overall somehow, no, the protocol for paying for people to run nodes and the protocol for paying people to form consensus are quite different. And at least maybe we can talk about them separately, and kind of understand that the deposits are something that's being placed for both games. The claim is somehow that like weight-based deposits makes the consensus game like somewhat more efficient, and where the information in the messages is somewhat more clear. Without saying anything about like whether or not we can check whether people are running different nodes or not. Because like that's the concern, right? Someone will claim to be running four high performance nodes. They'll be running one. If we're not doing like this crypto computation trace auditing stuff.
But I don't see how variable stakes prevents that.
It doesn't, but at least it can make it potentially transparent by
okay, but we can nail that down. It doesn't prevent it.
No, but it like does enable savings from it not happening. Like it makes it possible for it to not happen. Whereas like if you make equal stakes, then like it absolutely will happen.
All right, I think I need to think and discuss with others after.
Okay, well, I mean,
here.
Sure, I hear you. I think I think it's an interesting conversation. But I think like any transparency that we can get on the distribution of the validators, like any lower bound, is the kind of valuable information that people will like to have. And it's to me. I mean, maybe you can still get it with equal validator, but it is like you don't have to like.
So, but on the side, if there's a number of slots, you would and people wanted to crowd out others, they would attempt to split stakes just to do that.
It depends. I mean, for example, if the auction is so that the people who are offered to place the biggest stakes get in, then there's going to be only some extent to which they can split it, basically, as a function of what bids the other people put in.
Yeah, and you could make it a blind auction where you have a commitment and then a reveal.
Yeah, and then it would be like even more effective, right?
So that would help to alleviate it. But yeah, if it's the other way around, like if you have stake weighted rewards, and I can put up the same stake and get one seat that's 4 times as valuable, or I can split it and can get 4 seats. I have an incentive to do the second because if you sit down and do the math, if I take 4 seats, I'm going to have a slightly higher reward, even though it's spread out, because there are fewer people, right? Like,
why would you have a higher reward? Sorry, I don't follow.
um, because so if there are 100 seats, and if I split my stake 4 ways, I've occupied 4 seats. Whereas if at the margin I move my stake all to 1 seat, now there are 3 more players, and so the stake weighted rewards get slightly more dilute.
Yeah, and so like a kind of interesting mechanism that I've kind of thought of before is like to create an auction so that you can tell the cost of so people pay a cost for the slot, and then the cost of that slot will be like exactly the discounted future returns from having a slot. And if there is such a cost, then like there will be like no disincentive there will be no incentive to have 4 slots instead of 1.
Yeah, or just the stake weighted auction that you said, right? Like then splitting risks you not getting a seat at all.
Right. Yeah. So I think like all of this is complicated and will take some sorting.
All right, that's all I had.
Cool. I really appreciate you guys having the conversation. Thanks, Cal, for coming so early in the morning to have the conversation.
It was fun. I like the conversation too. Meta, are you feeling okay?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks.
And so I guess updates from my side. I've been working on the proof for the safety oracle to show that the clique oracle is in fact a safety oracle. It's going pretty well. It's got mad pages of proofs that are kind of coming along. Still need to reorganize them and make them presentable, but the rough kind of idea is that we have this notion of a clique which is a set of validators who in a protocol state all agree with some property, or sorry, they all see each other agree with a property, and there's no later messages from each other that they could see that disagree with that property. And then we kind of show that if we have a clique and we have a state transition that corresponds to a message from a validator outside the clique, then our clique survives. If we have a state transition from a validator inside the clique that isn't an equivocation, our clique also will survive. And then if we have a transition from a validator inside the clique that is an equivocation, then we have a new clique which removes that validator. And then we kind of, and like that's kind of like the basic kind of way that like the cliques are affected by state transitions. There's like these 3 cases where like in 2 of them they're unaffected, and in 1 of them the clique gets smaller. And then we have like this clique oracle that's constructed so that like, if there's whatever number of equivocations could still happen, so that there's not T in total, not more than T in total equivocations, then we will still have a majority of the weight in the clique. And like in that case, then you kind of will have this property that you'll always have a majority clique in all future states, and is a safety oracle. So it's kind of like the overview of the safety proof, safety oracle proof. But it's pretty cool because it like gets us to like dig at the internals of this of the class of estimators that we're looking at that are kind of driven by latest messages, and therefore can be are amenable to use by this oracle.
Vlad, I have a question.
Sure.
Could a message from the outside potentially increase the size of your clique if it completes?
Yeah, it could.
Okay. It may be a simple assumption to just leave it out, but I was just that's how cliques grow.
Yeah, totally, and that's interesting. But it's kind of not part of the proof to show that if you have like a clique of the clique oracle size, then you'll always have safety in the future. Like, yeah, they have keyhold in all the future states, but it is totally an interesting observation and maybe part of, for example, a liveness proof.
Or just an interesting note. Like you can say that this might increase the size, but for like, right, like in order to be a pessimistic proof, assume that it doesn't.
Right. Yeah, sure. That's that's an interesting point. Yeah. Totally. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. I think that there's like a decent chance that Ghost may, in some sense, be a fork choice rule that like very naturally is majority weight driven, because like at every height it uses basically exactly the majority weight rule, or like the max weight rule. And all of the kind of nice protocols that we have are max weight driven. And like, so like this, somehow the safety oracle identifies a class of estimators who are amenable to the use of the safety oracle. Like Ghost and median and mode and max weight on the binary. And these are like other kinds of max weight driven fork choice rules. Anyway, so I guess that's my update. Mostly I've just been working on this safety oracle proof. Anyone else?
So I wrote up a summary of what you told me last week, Vlad, and I don't know, are people interested? This is about the multi-round AND game on the open market.
Cool. Yeah, I'm excited about that.
Well, okay, then let me just share my screen. Let's see. This is, so I'll just read off this paragraph. Essentially, let R on IP be, this is the reward for the round I for player P if everyone chooses to be on, and then respectively R off IP is if the all, or at least one player chooses to be off, and DP is each player's deposit. And so essentially, if R on IP is equal to this function where X is some fixed value, and then R off is either 0 or some negative number. And if we assume each player has their own function SP that takes previous round outcomes and then reduces them to a single probability that represents the chance that all players will choose to be on the next round, then we can say that player P's expected rate of return is this. And if the external world's rate of return is out, then a player P will deposit up to this value. And this essentially, you can view this as, well, it's the probability that this function will actually pay out. And then if it pays out X, you have to divide it by the proportion of the stake that you are depositing compared to other people. And so if you do the math, essentially it comes down to this function. And so just a sanity check here. For example, if you're the only player and therefore you have no other deposits, right? This basically means the deposits of the other players not equal to yourself is 0, right? So everyone else, you have no other players, and therefore your deposit or the other player's deposits total to 0. And because you're the only player, and if you choose to be on, the probability that you believe that the next round will be everyone chooses to be on will of course be 1. And so then you will get exactly x divided by out. And for example, if out is 100% rate of return per round, then you want anything up to x so that your return will be better than 100%. And yeah, this is basically what you said, right, Vlad, when last week with what you said.
Sounds like basically what I said, but I was always assuming there were 2 players. I mean, maybe I didn't mention, but it's fine to have n players.
Okay, yeah, I see. Yeah, so I mean, this works for 2 players, but
yeah, that's the main difference that I see here.
Cool. Yeah, that's it for me on the Casper side.
So, but like what's the moral of the story here? Like, what's the somehow, I feel like you should recap.
Oh, so, well, I guess the moral of the story is I need to graph this function, right? And then essentially see as it varies with s, and then see how as it varies with your proportion of like what fraction your deposit is compared to all the rest of the validators. So yeah, I guess maybe this analysis is a bit incomplete. Is it just like this is the function that players will be incentivized to deposit until?
And very notably in this game, we have like n players, each of which are in the game. It's not like it's the game where it's like really open market, like they haven't showed up yet. It's like imagine they're guaranteed a slot and they're deciding how much to place.
Yes, that is true.
So it's like a somewhat interesting, not quite related game unless we set up a game where first you get an auction for the slot and then you decide how much you place, which may actually be cool. I mean, I don't know. It's just, I guess, something to consider. An auction for the slot followed by a game where you decide how much deposit you place. Because then the slot, we can get an idea of how much it costs to run a node and what the value of the slot is to get like an idea of the kind of barrier to entry using like an auction, and then place the deposits so that we like have like a barrier of entry that is independent of the cost of capital.
So for this game, do you imagine that the players know which other players are expected to join?
No, they all know which players are playing. There's no joining. There's no notion of joining. There's just a notion of like how much deposit do you place.
Oh, that's for what I've wrote up here, right?
Yeah, and also the way that I've defined it myself.
Okay, so then you're proposing that I should look into an alternative that's not true, right?
Well, I mean, it would be interesting if someone were to look into
Oh yeah,
it.
no, I agree. It's interesting, and so I guess my next question is like for that game, like, do we assume that we can see who's about to join? As in, like, does reputation matter? Basically, right?
Here's kind of like a question. The question is like, what's the population of players who are considering joining the game, and like, what are their individual utility functions and expectations? And then, because like, there's like going to be like a population of people who participate in an auction to get into the game. That's basically the idea, right?
Yeah.
Where auction is very widely defined.
I see. And well, yeah, I see that part. Although, and in addition, do we care about the reputation of the players that are about to join, like what they did in previous rounds?
That would be sophisticated.
Yeah, okay. So basically look into it without that first, and then look into it with that reputation in it is how you would approach it.
If possible, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that sounds good.
Sure. Does everyone like the AND game? Basically, the idea is that like all the players are sitting behind AND gates, and if any one of them outputs a 0, then like all the incentive mechanism sees a 0, And if they all output 1, then like the incentive mechanism sees 1. And so like the penalties and rewards are a function of like just the output of that gate, and not actually directly the strategies that players play.
I think it's a good start. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great. I don't care what you guys think. I think it's great.
Oh, so another thing is, I guess, I mean, the end game's great, but have you looked into games where essentially you still can't tell whether you're being censored or if a node's just offline, but you can like also differentiate between whether a node is censoring, or you can differentiate the reward that you can give to, for example, like both nodes censoring each other and then just one node being offline.
I mean, I think I see what you mean, meaning like they like, their messages omit each other's messages, but you still have messages from both of them.
Yeah, well, specifically in the case where one node is offline, or if you make it so that.
So there's one of the reasons why like I think we're not considering this is because the incentive mechanism is actually going to be implemented like in a blockchain, right? Like in like a single kind of execution, and it's so like it's either going to be kind of like in one or the other's fork, and like if they're really omitting each other, like they will be completely missing from the other. But from the point of view of like just pure protocol states, like I think that makes sense. But then it's like imagine having like a bank on a network incentivizing consensus protocol. Like I think they would be able to do better than something in the consensus protocol.
Yeah, okay, I see that. So yeah, I guess for blockchain use, it's not that interesting of a question.
No, but it might be interesting actually. It's totally a fascinating research question to see to which extent a bank on a network is more effective at incentivizing consensus than a mechanism in the consensus protocol itself.
Oh yeah. So I guess if we look into having a bank on the consensus,
that might be even a more tractable problem, right? The it feels like a more tractable problem.
Yeah, intuitively. Yeah, I guess so.
Anyone else have an update?
Well, or if no one does, can you explain a bit more on like where this bank will be, if that makes sense? Like,
yeah, sure. Imagine it's like a node on the network, and it can like receive messages from all the nodes, and it runs the fork choice rule itself, like on protocol states, like that like it has as like locally on the network. It's not implemented in the state of a blockchain. And so it has access to, for example, forks that don't reference each other. So imagine if we have the situation you're describing where Alice and Bob are censoring each other's blocks, then like the tip of Alice's chain and the tip of Bob's chain like won't include each other's tips, right? But like the bank will be able to see both. But like the incentive mechanisms in Alice's tips and the incentive mechanisms in Bob's tips are like each not going to be able to see that censorship because they're each engaged in that censorship.
So I guess
if full nodes have more information about censorship than the incentive mechanism does in like the normal way we do it.
So my immediate response is like, well, don't you have this now like centralization risk, or I don't know what to call it.
Yeah, but it's just a thought experiment, Kent.
Okay, cool.
It's just like
Yeah, yeah.
imagine you have a trusted bank that would implement this incentive mechanism. Then like what would your payouts be? It's like a good question.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. That sounds good.
Like a research question. Yeah. But it's not like definitely not how we would make it. But it is neat. It would be neat if full nodes can incentivize the consensus better than the incentive mechanism can, because then we can think about like, oh, what extent can we actually like have the incentive mechanism get full nodes to incentivize the consensus to have a more effective regime of like, you know, enforcement for deviations protocol.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, super fun. I'm excited to work on the AND game.
I am too. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I was sort of stuck on where to go. Well, I guess I can still plot the stuff, but after that, I was thinking like, well, like
You have to
how?
choose a penalty. Choose the penalty, Ken. What should the penalty be, or what should the reward be?
So that's the thing, right? Am I literally just gonna pick a number on this continuum of various functions with 4 parameters and then just like go through all of them? Like, what is the sort of the proper mathematical way to traverse everything? If that
Normally,
makes
what I want to do is I want to like have like an attack model and to maximize security against that attack, and like have for some reason feel like my attack model is like the right one. And like, you know, that's like the ideal. The ideal is that like you're choosing your penalties to maximize the cost of attack.
Yeah, well, so don't you have to like walk through all the functions that are possible, you know, given
Well,
you know
need
how
to
like
find optimal somehow. I mean, I don't know if you really got to walk through all of them realistically.
yeah, and I guess that was my worry. Like I didn't see how I could do that. So
Yeah, you
But-
gotta, you know, do some heavy lifting or get lucky, or maybe just trying just right. You know, who knows?
so
But I'm pretty optimistic that it's going to be totally doable. So, like in this case, we could say, look, imagine if the attacker is trying to cause 10 zeros to come out of the end gate in a row. That might be like a legitimate attack model. And if we choose P to maximize the cost of that, like that would be great. That would be super encouraging.
and so how do you prove that P is better than, or like that deposit, right? Or sorry, yeah, that reward is or end penalty is better than every others without traversing the whole range of reward functions and penalty functions. I guess you sort of mentioned.
I mean, what you do is you like say, I'm not going to look over all the functions. No. I'm going to look at all the ones that have this parametric form, and you just search for the parameters, and you like choose the parameter to maximize, and you're like, okay, at least I could do something.
I see, and I guess I was
ideally
like
but we'll do what we can.
Yeah. So, I mean, like for starters, something really easy, for example, is that we only need to look at mechanisms where the reward for being on is greater than the reward for being off, right? Because if all players, or if it's still
want it to be a dominant strategy to be on, just like straight up.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, and so that eliminates like a good number of functions, but
yeah, totally.
I guess I was hoping that there would be something more specific, like we only need to look at linear functions on each of the parameters, or I don't know, something like that. I don't know if there's research on that kind of thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, totally. We make that kind of assumption, especially for the end game. Basically, what I normally do is here's what I normally do. I have a fixed return that everyone distributes according to their deposits, and then I have a cost that's a fixed proportion of your deposit every time there's a fault, more like the zero in turn returned by the end game. And so I like you always lose a fixed proportion of your deposit, and like that proportion is like the parameter. And so I just have like one parameter. It's not like linear, but like you lose money or a portion of your deposit for every fault is like my assumption. And I also assume like fixed returns. So I guess I do narrow it a lot, just so that it's tractable, and also so that we take advantage of the deposits, really, then penalize you by taking deposits away.
Yeah. Okay. I see. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'll keep thinking, or hopefully I'll read across something that is like, wow, this can really narrow things down. But that sounds good.
Yeah. I think the deposit model narrows things down a lot. I think like if the deposit model combined with the fact that like we don't know what the revenue model will be, narrows things down quite a lot. I think like somehow if there's like the question of how much you can issue currency for in consensus is kind of like not really known. And so like for the most part, I think like have designing these things for fixed return is probably the safest thing to do, so that like so that we can, if we maximize the costs for any fixed return, then at least we have like like a good understanding that like, oh, we can reduce the return and reduce our security, but and increase the return and increase our security.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It'll be like optimal at every return level.
I see. Yeah. That does narrow things a lot. And in fact, I think we can already say that we want the reward for being on to be increasing at least linearly with your deposit, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It should be absolutely linear to your deposit.
Or better
Yeah.
than that. Yeah.
No, I think what I normally do, just for simplicity, is I just like distribute the rewards. But when I'm searching for optimality, I'll do something a little bit different, which is like I'll give them each some amount of rewards for like their cost of running a node, and then like the rest of it I'll pile in with their deposits, so that they're subject to penalties there.
Okay. So what? Okay, I guess so. You're specifically now searching for like what exactly the sort of constant on your deposit is this kind of the search? Because
no, it's more like we have a fixed return to distribute to all the validators, and there's lots of ways to split up that pie, right? And actually, we might be better off if we didn't quite give them all of the pie if they screw up, right? It'll be more robust. But we do need to give them some of the pie so that like they do show up.
oh, so the penalty portion is what's not.
Yeah. So basically,
Yeah. Okay.
So basically, the penalty. So like there's the penalty in the sense of being offline, and there's like the penalties as in how much of your deposit you lose, and the rewards and how as in like the amount that's available to the mechanism. But like there's like this like sum of all these things that you actually bear, right? You have like some portion of the rewards, and you might lose that as a part of a penalty.
For sure.
In like this more general kind of design space, but like I think like at first just like split up the penalty, the reward proportional to the deposits, and penalize in proportion to the deposits. It's like the natural kind of choice of like simple model.
And then we have to graph how optimal this is against the attack of, I don't know, like someone coming in and then going off 10 times, for example.
Yeah, exactly. And like how much do they have to lose to do that?
I see. Yeah. Okay. Cool. That sounds like something I can do.
Great. Go, Kent. Okay, well, does anyone have anything else? Well, in that case, I guess we can yield back the time. The
Yeah.
1 minute. Sounds good.
Thanks again, Vlad.
Yeah, cheers.
All right. See you guys next week. Peace.